One of my favorite things to say while driving with my wife. If I anticipate a challenging maneuver ahead is I going to try something. I saw it done in a cartoon once, but I think I can pull it off. You'd better buckle up. And you may want to close your eyes. It freaks her out, every time.
Here comes Speed Racer, he's a demon on wheels. He's a demon and he's gonna be chasing after someone.
I feel like I should give a similar type caution to those about to view this presentation. It started as a simple little presentation that would tie in with the movie and cover a subject Bob is very passionate about. Just like all his projects. Then he became overwhelmed by all the information. So, he kept restarting, changing the layout, the storyboards, etc. in an effort to keep it short. Then Bob ran into technical issues with computers crashing and losing partially finished projects. But he was too far into it to quit, although quite frustrated. So it ended up taking him most of the summer to complete. Which should have been done in a few weeks. With computers and software still not 100%, he couldn't refine and tweak it all to his normal standards.
Apple has Siri as an intelligent assistant. Not being in the iPhone, iPad league, I am stuck with Android apps. I was looking for something to help with narration because there was a lot and I didn't want to burden my wife, Dana, with too much as she had already done so much.
My golden voice just doesn't record well.
I finally ran across an Android app I was compatible with. I called him Sensor. The translation isn't perfect, but it makes it easier to read something if it is being read out loud as you read it.
This is Sensor.
Yo. Sensor is helpful with narration, research, video, and computer graphics.
As the Android is non-gender, Sensor can narrate in both male and female voices for variety. And that's all we'll say about that.
The presentation is in 3 segments. Each one about 10 to 15 minutes long. We will see 1 or 2 tonight and the rest next week. Please hold your questions until the end. So I don't have to stop the program. Chances are it will be answered later in the video. Short, smart-assed comments will be tolerated.
I dedicate this project to my wife, Dana. Thank you for your patience and tolerance. When I become obsessed with a topic and can't focus on much else. Until I complete it. Even with many technical setbacks. You gave me the time to complete it. I could not do it without your help. Your input and feedback. I love you. Thank you. Bob.
Sensor will now scan the audience for alertness and begin presentation.
All alerts. Begin program.
Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country.
God and country. Separation of church and state. America, to pray or not to pray? By Bob Donnelly, September 2016. Objective. Outline. 1. The First Amendment. 2. When was it altered and why? 3. What effect did it have? 4. What changes has it caused in the schools? 5. What changes has it caused in the home? 6. What changes has it caused in the country? 7. How did it happen? 8. Can it be fixed? What can we do?
Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof.
The First Amendment, which states, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the exercise thereof. End quote. From this, it's clear. The founders' original intent was for the government to take a neutral position with respect to religion. Government was not to favor anyone's religion or prohibit anyone's religion.
When was it altered and why?
Overview. Engel versus Vitale, 1962. Engel versus Vitale, Supreme Court of the United States. Argued April 3rd, 1962. Decided June 25, 1962. Full case name, Stephen I. Engel et al. Versus William J. Vitale Jr. et al. Citations 370 U.S. 421. Background of the case. The case was brought by a group of families of public school students in New Hyde Park, New York, who complained that the voluntary prayer written by the State Board of Regents to Almighty God contradicted their religious beliefs. Led by Stephen Engel, a follower of Judaism, the plaintiffs sought to challenge the constitutionality of the state's prayer in school policy. They were supported by groups opposed to the school prayer, including rabbinical organizations, ethical culture, and Judaic organizations. The acting parties were not members of one particular religion. Despite being listed in the court papers as an atheist, plaintiff Lawrence Roth later denied this allegation and described himself as religious but not comfortable with prayer. The 5 plaintiffs were made up of 3 Jews and 2 self-proclaimed spiritual people who did not belong to any one organized religion.
Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee, and we beg Thy blessings upon us, our parents, our teachers, and our country.
The plaintiffs argued that opening the school day with such a prayer violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution as applied to the states through the 14th, which says in part, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The governments of 22 states signed on to an amicus curiae brief urging affirmance of the New York Court of Appeals decision that upheld the constitutionality of the prayer. The American Jewish Committee, the Synagogue Council of America, and the American Ethical Union each submitted briefs urging the court to instead reverse and rule that the prayer was unconstitutional. Court membership. The Supreme Court Justices. Now, I'm not reading that. Here's the list. You can read it if you want. Laws applied. U.S. Constitution, First Amendment. Case opinions. Majority. Black, joined by Warren, Douglas, Clark, Harlan, Brennan. Concurrence. Douglas. Dissent. Stewart. Frankfurter and White took no part in the consideration or decision of the case. Holding. Government-directed prayer in public schools violates the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, even if the prayer is denominationally neutral and students may remain silent or excused from the classroom during its recitation. Opinion of the Court. In an opinion delivered by Justice Hugo Black, the Court ruled that the government-written prayers were not to be recited in public schools and were a violation of the United States Constitution and the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. This was decided in a vote of 6-1, because before the decision could be announced, Justice Felix Frankfurter suffered a cerebral stroke that forced him to retire, and Justice Byron White took no part in the case. The court explained the importance of separation between church and state by giving a lengthy history of the issue, beginning with the 16th century in England. It then stated that school's prayer is a religious activity by the very nature of it being a prayer, and that prescribing such a religious activity for school children violates the Establishment Clause. The program, created by government officials to promote a religious belief, was therefore constitutionally not permissible.
What effect did it have?
Who was right? What effects did it have? After studying the case, Engel v. Vitale, thoroughly, I believe the court ruled correctly from a legal and technical perspective, although not from a moral or ethical viewpoint. However, the flurry of cases that flooded the courts after this landmark decision totally distorted and twisted the ruling and changed interpretations of the rulings, laws, definitions, and today we have people believing separation of church and state means the reverse of what it actually does. Here is a quick explanation of separation of church and state, followed by highlights of a few of the other cases.
Separation of church and state is a phrase that had a really well-established historical meaning at the time the founders used it. It was not just a concocted phrase. It stayed established for 150 years after they used it, but very simply, it was that the Bible had created an institutional separation of church and state. You had Aaron over the spiritual stuff in the temple. You had Moses over the civil stuff. When King Uzziah tried to combine them, God whacked the king, and now I want the two institutions separate. But it got combined at about the 4th century A.D. And what happened was the government took over the church, and the government said, we'll determine theology, and you guys enforce what we tell you to do. It wasn't the church taking over the government. So what happened was we went about 12 centuries that way. We call it the Dark Ages. That's where all the atrocities occurred in the name of religion, particularly the Christian religion. And you get to a point in time where that you have dissenters popping up. About 30 folks over 7 nations, 250 years, said, no, we got to go back to what the scriptures say. And that's the first guys to start pushing for separation of church and state. It really came to a head when Henry VIII in England wanted a divorce. The church said, no, not doctrine, you can't get divorced. He said, I'll start my own church and determine my own doctrines. At that point, Reverend Richard Hooker said, no, it's got to be separation of church and state. You're the government, you don't determine church doctrine. So at that point, you had from England in the 1580s starting to come to America people who had that view, that belief. The government is always trying to take over the church, not vice versa. So for the 150 years in America, separation of church and state meant the government can't stop us from doing a religious activity, determining our own theology, expressing ourselves, our faith the way we want. And that's the way the founders did in the First Amendment. Government cannot do anything to establish a federal religion, and government cannot do anything to stop religious exercises, period. When Jefferson wrote the famous letter, January the 1st, 1802, it was in response to a group of Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, saying, we're the minority religion up here. We're afraid the government's going to stop us from expressing our faith. He said it won't happen. There's a wall of separation between church and state. So for 150 years after Jefferson's letter, separation meant the government could not stop a public religious activity. It changed in 1947, a judicial decision called Everson versus Board of Education. The court said, you know, we think Jefferson screwed it up. Separation, he said, meant the government couldn't stop it. We think that it should mean that the church can't get involved in public stuff. And so at that point in time, we're now at the point where Congress shall make no law now means that a kid can't say the word God at a graduation, which is a stupid parsing of the Constitution and First Amendment. But that's the history of separation of church and state.
In 1962, Engel versus Vitale, the Supreme Court explained that the word church would no longer mean a federally established denomination. It would now mean a religious activity in public. In this case, arguments of vague wording and voluntary participation made by the defendants were dismissed, establishing a precedent of no tolerance for laws violating the Establishment Clause. The Establishment Clause. 1962, Engel v. Vitale. School-sponsored prayer is unconstitutional. 1963, Abington School District v. Schempp. Bible reading in public schools unconstitutional. 1968, Epperson v. Arkansas. Legislature cannot ban teaching of evolution. 1992, Lee v. Wiseman. School-sponsored graduation prayer is unconstitutional. 1999, Cole v. Cleveland Board of Education. School board cannot open meeting with prayer. 2000, Santa Fe Independent School District v. Doe. Student-led prayer as sporting events was unconstitutional.
What changes has it caused in the schools?
We've seen the direct effect the distortion of the First Amendment in the cases following Engel versus Vitale has had on schools and government facilities by removing religious activity. There were several other cases not on the previous list. To me, however, the most bizarre case was Wallace versus Jaffrey, 1985 in Alabama.
Court precedents. 1985 Voluntary Morning Prayer. Facts: 1981 Alabama law requiring schools to observe a period of silence not to exceed 1 minute in duration, for meditation or voluntary prayer.
Supreme Court ruled the daily moment of silence unconstitutional for meditation or prayer.
How would you even enforce such a law?
Take a moment and think about it.
What changes has it caused in the schools? What changes has it caused in the home? What changes has it caused in the country?
America's New Direction, Moral Decline? In his book, America, To Pray or Not to Pray? David Barton uses government statistics to present over 40 charts and graphs to show that 1962, the year religious principles were separated from public affairs, was the year the moral decline began in youth, education, families and the nation. Here are a few of the graphs.
Once the religious, the hunted and weary, chasing the promise of freedom and hope, came to this country to build a new vision, far from the reaches of kingdom and gold. Like the Christians, some would burn the witches, later some got slaves to gather riches, but still from near and far to seek America. She just patiently smiled and bore a child to be the spirit and guiding light. And though the past has its share of injustice, kind was the spirit in many a way. But its protectors and friends have been sleeping. Now it's a monster and will not obey. Of the country, but now they won't pay no mind, 'cause the people grew fat and got
How did it happen? Can it be fixed?
One of the key reasons people flocked to the New World was to be able to practice values through the religion of their choice, or no religion at all, without government prohibition. Unfortunately, the 1980 case of Stone v. Graham symbolized the start of the demise of all values in the public school system when the Ten Commandments were banned. With this event, we, as a society, may have opened the door to a society devoid of all values, whether originating in the Judeo-Christian tradition or any other tradition. We have allowed the Supreme Court to improperly interpret the original intent of the founders when we allowed them to systematically eradicate values from society in the name of diversity and equality.
So what has happened is the Supreme Court has usurped all this power over the states and the people and been imposing its views and values on the states and on the people. But there's a weapon in the Constitution left there by the Founding Fathers, Article 3, Section 2, whereby Congress can tell the Supreme Court, stay out of this area, you have no authority here. It can restrict the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court by simple majority vote of both houses and the signature of the president. But Congress is too cowardly to confront the court, even though it has the power to do it. Not enough Americans are aware of this power, which is right in there. We do have a weapon to deal with the Supreme Court, a legal and constitutional weapon, and it is a dereliction of duty on the part of the Congress and President that they have never used it. It suggests that they are not serious in fighting the.
Do I think Congress is going to take on the Supreme Court over moral matters? Not in this millennium.
A new class of problems. Before the ban on religious teachings, the top public school problems were listed as 1. Talking. 2. Chewing gum. 3. Making noise. 4. Running in the halls. 5. Getting out of turn in line. 6. Wearing improper clothing. 7. Not putting paper in waste baskets. Polls now list the top offenses as 1. Rape. 2. Robbery. 3. Assault. 4. Burglary. 5. Arson. 6. Bombings. 7. Murder. 8. Suicide. 9. Absenteeism. 10. Vandalism. 11. Extortion. 12. Drug abuse. 13. Alcohol abuse. 14. Gang warfare. So, in summary, as conclusion, a small group of parents pushed their case, rejected by all lower courts, to the Supreme Court. They win and a government-written prayer is outlawed. More than a dozen similar cases are filed and the courts use the ruling in this case to twist and misinterpret the Constitution and reverse the definition of the First Amendment. This is based on my thorough study of these events. I have not listed all of the facts info in order to keep this presentation brief, but I have them available. Yes, this is the short version. Some say it had to do with the rapid growth of public schools in the 20th century. Some say it had to do with the diversity of religions in the country. Some say the churches should have stepped in and protested. The changes have made a definite impact on the moral fibers of our country. I believe the changes that have been made are here to stay. No one is going to convince Congress to unite and challenge the Supreme Court over moral issues. We need to educate. Many people wrongly believe the First Amendment means the opposite of what it does, simply because it was never explained to them. We need to educate them, lovingly. Many people wrongly believe prayer has been outlawed in public schools. It never was. Only government-sponsored prayer. Students can openly pray and share their faith. We need to be vigilant, so that things don't get too far out of hand or be taken to extremes in either direction. If we just sit back and do nothing, these things will erode our religious freedoms. I believe there is a constant battle of good and evil going on all around us. And it plays a part in all of this. We can't actively participate in it except through prayer. Yet it can have a direct effect on us. I will conclude with a 2-minute scene from God's Not Dead 2, where a pastor brings this topic up at a brunch. When they talk about the possibility of their sermons being subpoenaed by the state.
Gentlemen, I don't want to spoil your brunch, but I'm hearing from a friend of mine in the prosecutor's office about a subpoena that just came down, demanding that we submit copies of our sermons for the last 3 months for review.
Can they do that?
They tried it in Houston.
So now the government can determine what we can and can't preach at our churches.
Let's not overreact. I'm sure there's no ill intent here.
Unfortunately, I think this is just the beginning. We've been ignoring it, and now we're paying the price for it.
Well, don't forget the silent majority. They're out there. They just need something to stand for.
I'll admit there's pressure, but I think with time, this will correct itself.
Forgive me, but I think you're wrong. I'm serving on a jury in a case right now that touches on these issues. Of course, I'm not allowed to talk about it, but I mean, the one thing that it's convinced me of is that if we stand by and do nothing, pressure that we're feeling today is going to mean persecution tomorrow.
What makes you so sure?
Speed of change, viciousness of the opposition. The message of the gospel has us standing in the way of a lot of things that powerful people want. And our resistance to change that message, because it's not ours to change, has made us a lot of enemies. Whether we admit it or not, we're at war. The war of Ephesians 6. Not against flesh and blood, but against the powers of this world, against the spiritual forces in the heavenly realms. And if we insist on denying that, then we've already lost.